The autumn mist rolled thick across the Hürtgen forest in November 1944, swallowing entire trees in its gray embrace. Hauptmann Klaus Bergmann stood beside his Jagdpanther, running his gloved hand along the cold steel hull. The tank destroyer was a monster, over 9 meters of sloped armor and deadly firepower, but Klaus knew what the statistics whispered in the Wehrmacht headquarters. 85%. That was the crew survival rate turned upside down. Most men who climbed into these steel coffins never climbed out. Klaus was 32, which made him ancient by tank crew standards. His face carried the map of 2 years on the Eastern Front, lines carved deep around his eyes, a scar splitting his left eyebrow where shrapnel had kissed him at Kursk. He had survived when so many had not. Sometimes he wondered if that made him lucky or cursed. His crew gathered around him in the pre-dawn darkness. Unteroffizier Hans Weber, the gunner, barely 20 years old but with hands steady as German engineering. Gefreiter Otto Klein, the loader, a farm boy from Bavaria who still wrote letters to his mother every Sunday, though Klaus suspected none of them reached home anymore. Friedrich Meyer, the driver, silent and methodical, who could coax their 60-ton beast through mud that would swallow lesser vehicles. And young Wilhelm Richter, the radio operator, 18 years old with fear dancing in his eyes every morning. They called themselves Die Geister, the ghosts, because in their Jagdpanther, they appeared from nowhere, struck, and vanished. Also because ghosts were already dead, and that made the job easier to stomach. The briefing had come at midnight. American armor was pushing through the forest roads, trying to break the Siegfried Line. Their Jagdpanther, along with 3 others from their company, would set an ambush at the crossroads near Wassenack. The hunting ground was perfect. Elevated positions, thick forest cover, narrow approaches that would funnel the Americans into a killing zone. Klaus gathered his crew close, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The smell of diesel and wet earth mixed with the ever-present scent of fear, though none of them would name it. Listen carefully, Klaus said, his voice low and firm. We follow protocol exactly as trained. No heroics, no risks. We fire, we displace, we survive. The Jagdpanther is powerful, but it has one fatal weakness. What is that, Herr Hauptmann? Wilhelm asked, though Klaus suspected the boy already knew. No turret, Klaus replied. We cannot rotate our gun. If they flank us, if they get behind us, we are a coffin on tracks. Our armor is thick in front, but the sides and rear are vulnerable. One hit there and the entire crew compartment becomes an oven. Hans checked his gunner's sight for the 3rd time that morning, a nervous habit Klaus had learned not to comment on. The 88mm Pak 43 gun was a masterpiece, capable of punching through any American tank at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers, but it required precision and time to traverse the entire vehicle for target changes. Otto loaded practice rounds, then unloaded them, then loaded them again. His ritual. Back home in Bavaria, his family raised dairy cows. He had told Klaus once that loading the gun felt like the rhythmic motion of milking, and it calmed him. Klaus found comfort in the strangest things soldiers did to keep their sanity. Friedrich climbed into the driver's compartment, running through his checks. The Maybach HL-230 engine was temperamental in the cold, and getting the massive tank destroyer into position required skill. One wrong move, one mechanical failure, and they would be a stationary target. The first light began filtering through the forest canopy, turning the mist from black to pearl gray. In the distance, the rumble of artillery provided a constant backdrop, like distant thunder that never quite arrived. Klaus pulled out a photograph from his breast pocket. His wife, Anna, and their daughter, Greta, standing in front of their apartment in Berlin. The photo was 2 years old. Greta would be 9 now. He had no idea if the apartment still stood, if Berlin still stood. The Allied bombing raids had intensified, and letters from home had stopped coming 3 months ago. He tucked the photo away and climbed onto the Jagdpanther's deck, then dropped through the commander's hatch into the fighting compartment. The interior smelled of oil, metal, and sweat. Cramped. 5 men squeezed into a space barely larger than a small bedroom, surrounded by ammunition, machinery, and thin armor that might as well be paper if struck at the wrong angle. The engine roared to life and Friedrich guided them forward. The forest swallowed them as they moved into position. Klaus checked his watch. 0545 hours. The Americans would come with the dawn, confident in their numbers, their supply lines, their inevitable victory. Die Geister would be waiting, but Klaus knew the statistics. He knew that most of them would not see Christmas. The question was not if they would die, but how and whether it would be quick. The mist continued to roll, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of American tank engines began to echo through the trees. The American column appeared at 0712 hours, rolling through the forest road with the confidence of an army that owned the sky. Klaus counted through his periscope. 6 Sherman tanks, 3 half-tracks filled with infantry, and 2 supply trucks bringing up the rear. Standard reconnaissance force, probing for weaknesses in the German line. Hans already had the lead Sherman in his crosshairs, range measured at 1,400 meters. The other 3 Jagdpanthers from their company were positioned in a staggered line along the ridge, invisible beneath camouflage netting and forest debris. "Wait for my command," Klaus whispered into the intercom, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The first shot would determine everything. Miss, and they would lose the element of surprise. Hit, and the Americans would scatter like startled deer, making follow-up shots difficult. The lead Sherman rolled closer. 1,200 meters. 1,000 meters. Fire. The 88mm gun erupted with a sound that shook the entire vehicle. The armor-piercing round crossed the distance in less than 2 seconds, striking the Sherman's frontal armor and punching through like paper. The American tank exploded from the inside, turret flipping into the air as ammunition cooked off. Before the echo faded, the other Jagdpanthers opened fire. 2 more Shermans burst into flames within seconds. The American column dissolved into chaos, tanks reversing wildly, infantry jumping from half-tracks and running for cover. But then everything went wrong. One of the Jagdpanthers, commanded by Lieutenant Schneider, fired too eagerly and exposed his position. A Sherman that had survived the initial volley turned its turret with horrifying speed and returned fire. The round struck Schneider's Jagdpanther on the side armor, exactly where Klaus had warned. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. Flames shot 60 meters into the air as the ammunition storage ignited. No one inside had time to scream. 5 men turned to ash in 3 seconds. Wilhelm's voice cracked over the radio. "Schneider is gone. They are flanking left." Klaus felt ice flood his veins. The Americans were not retreating. They were adapting. 2 Shermans had broken from the road, circling through the trees to attack from the sides where the Jagdpanthers were most vulnerable. "Friedrich, reverse now," Klaus shouted. "Hans, traverse right. Enemy armor at 10 o'clock. The Jagdpanther lurched backward, engine screaming. But the vehicle was never designed for quick maneuvers. 60 tons of steel moved with the grace of a dying elephant. The trees that had provided cover now became obstacles, limiting their movement. A Sherman appeared through the mist, closer than Klaus had ever wanted to see enemy armor. 200 meters. Point-blank range. Hans fired without waiting for orders. The round hit the Sherman's turret ring, and the American tank stopped dead, smoke pouring from every hatch. But 2 more Shermans were coming. Klaus realized with cold certainty why 85% of Jagdpanther crews died. They were hunters that became hunted the moment the prey fought back. The second Sherman fired, and the world turned white. The round struck the Jagdpanther's frontal armor at an angle, ricocheting off with a sound like a church bell being struck by a sledgehammer. The entire crew was thrown forward from the impact. Otto's head slammed against the breech mechanism, blood streaming down his face. Wilhelm screamed into the radio, calling for support that would never come. "Friedrich, hard left," Klaus shouted, tasting copper in his mouth where he had bitten his tongue. "Get us hull down behind that ridge." The Jagdpanther pivoted with agonizing slowness, tracks chewing through mud and fallen branches. Another Sherman round whistled past, so close Klaus could feel the displacement of air through the open hatch. The vehicle lurched up the small embankment, Friedrich pushing the Maybach engine beyond its limits. Then Klaus saw it. Through the smoke and chaos, An American tank commander had made a fatal mistake. The 3rd Sherman had overextended, pushing too far forward in its eagerness to flank. It was now separated from its support, exposed on open ground, and its side armor was facing directly toward Klaus's gun. "Hans," Klaus said with eerie calm. "Target left. Side shot. Make it count." Hans's hands moved across the traverse controls with the precision of a surgeon. The massive 88mm gun shifted, the crosshairs settling on the Sherman's vulnerable profile. Range, 380 meters. The Sherman commander still had not realized his error. Firing. The armor-piercing round hit perfectly, just below the turret ring where the side armor was thinnest. The Sherman's fuel tanks ignited instantly, and the crew began bailing out, men on fire rolling in the mud trying to extinguish themselves. Klaus looked away. They were the enemy, but they were also tank crews. They understood the same nightmares. The remaining American Shermans hesitated. They had lost 4 tanks in less than 3 minutes. The cost of pushing forward was becoming too high. Klaus watched through his periscope as they began to withdraw, laying smoke and reversing back down the forest road. The battle was over. Die Geister had survived. But when Klaus radioed the other Jagdpanthers, only one responded. Schneider's crew was dead. Oberfeldwebel-Koch's Jagdpanther had taken a round through the engine compartment and was burning. 2 of his crew made it out. 3 did not. 10 men had started this morning. 6 remained. If you are still watching, if you want to know how these men survived when so many others did not, subscribe to this channel. Because what happened next changed everything Klaus thought he knew about war, survival, and the thin line between courage and madness. The real story is just beginning. Otto wiped blood from his eyes and looked at Klaus. "Are we going home, Herr Hauptmann?" Klaus stared at the burning wrecks scattered across the forest. "No," he said quietly. "We are already ghosts. Ghosts do not go home." For 3 weeks, Die Geister became legends whispered in American briefing rooms. They struck at dawn, at dusk, in fog so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. Klaus had learned the terrible mathematics of survival. Never stay in position after firing, never engage more than you could destroy in 30 seconds, never let them see you coming. The crew had changed. Otto no longer wrote letters to his mother. Hans stopped checking his sight 3 times and checked it once with cold efficiency. Friedrich drove like a man possessed, finding routes through terrain that should have been impossible. Wilhelm's fear transformed into something harder, sharper. They were no longer soldiers. They were survivors. But survival had a price. On December 12th, headquarters ordered them into Bastogne. The Americans had surrounded the town, and the German garrison was trapped. One Jagdpanther was expected to break through enemy lines, deliver critical supplies, and extract high-value intelligence officers. It was suicide dressed as a mission. Klaus stood in the company command post, a half-destroyed farmhouse that smelled of death and wet stone. Major Hoffman, their commanding officer, looked like he had aged 20 years in a month. Behind him, a map showed Bastogne as a red circle drowning in blue American positions. "You are sending us to die," Klaus said flatly. "Not a question. A statement." Hoffman met his eyes. "I am sending our best crew to do what no one else can. You have survived every engagement. You are Die Geister." "Ghosts die too," Klaus replied. "Not yet, they have not." That night, Klaus gathered his crew in their Jagdpanther. The vehicle had taken damage, scorch marks across the hull, repairs hastily welded, but it still ran. Friedrich had kept it alive through mechanical miracles and sheer stubbornness. "We can refuse," Klaus said. The words hung in the cold air. "We have done our duty. No one would blame us." Hans looked up from cleaning his gunner's optics. "Would we blame ourselves?" Otto pulled out a letter he had written but never sent. "My mother needs to know I was brave. Even if she never receives this, I need to know I was brave." Wilhelm, the youngest, the one who had trembled that first morning, nodded slowly. "If we die doing something that matters. That is more than most men get." Friedrich said nothing, just started the engine. Klaus felt something break open inside him. Not despair, but a strange clarity. They were going to Bastogne. They would likely die there. But they would die as men who had chosen their fate, not had it chosen for them. The Jagdpanther rolled out at 0200 hours, moving through darkness so complete it felt like driving through ink. American positions surrounded them on all sides. One mistake, one sound, one moment of bad luck, and they would burn like all the others. But Klaus understood now why 85% of Jagdpanther crews died. It was not because they were unlucky. It was because someone had to stand in the way of the inevitable, knowing they would lose and do it anyway. The breakthrough happened at 0347 hours, in a moment of chaos so pure it felt like the universe had stopped making sense. They had penetrated 6 kilometers into American lines, moving like a metal ghost through the winter darkness. Friedrich navigated by instinct and memory, avoiding roads, using streambeds and forest trails that barely supported their weight. Twice they passed within 50 meters of American positions, the enemy soldiers so focused on the expected attack routes they never looked into the darkness where a 60-ton monster crawled past. But at the forest edge outside Bastogne, their luck shattered. An American patrol stumbled onto them, flares igniting the night into harsh white brilliance. Within seconds, the radio exploded with enemy communications. They had been spotted. Every American unit within 10 kilometers would converge on their position. Klaus made a decision that defied every survival instinct he had learned. Full speed ahead, into the town. Do not stop for anything. Friedrich slammed the accelerator, and the Jagdpanther burst from the forest like a locomotive from hell. Machine gun fire sparked off their armor. A bazooka round hit their side but failed to penetrate. They crashed through a wooden fence, across a frozen field, and straight into Bastogne's outer defenses. German soldiers, starving and half-frozen, stared in disbelief as the Jagdpanther smashed through American encirclement and into the town center. Klaus threw open the hatch, screaming for the intelligence officers. 3 men appeared from a cellar, running through machine gun fire to reach the vehicle. They climbed onto the hull, clinging to anything they could grab. Klaus pulled them toward the hatches as American fire intensified. A bullet caught Wilhelm in the shoulder, spinning him backward, but Otto grabbed him and dragged him into the compartment. "Get us out," Klaus shouted. What Friedrich did next would be talked about in panzer divisions for years. He reversed the Jagdpanther at full speed, spinning the massive vehicle in its own length using a technique that should have torn the transmission apart. They crashed back through the perimeter, through the field into the forest, with half the American army firing at their disappearing shadow. A Sherman appeared blocking their escape route. Hans fired without aiming, pure instinct. The round hit low, tearing off the Sherman's tracks and sending it spinning like a broken toy. Then they were through, into the darkness, into the forest, into the impossible space between alive and dead where Die Geister lived. They rendezvoused with German lines at dawn. Wilhelm was bleeding but alive. The intelligence officers carried information that would save hundreds of German soldiers in Bastogne. Major Hoffmann stood waiting, looking at the Jagdpanther, at the crew climbing out on shaking legs, at the impossible mission completed. "You are either the bravest men in the Wehrmacht," Hoffmann said quietly, "or the craziest." Klaus looked at his crew, at these men who had become brothers in steel and fire. "We are just ghosts, Herr Major. And ghosts do what the living cannot." April 1985. 40 years later, Klaus Bergmann stood in front of the Deutsches Panzermuseum in Munster, his hand resting on the cold steel of a restored Jagdpanther. Not his Jagdpanther. That one had been destroyed in the final weeks of the war, abandoned near the Elbe River when the fuel ran out and the Reich collapsed. But it could have been his. They all looked the same, sleek, deadly, and cursed. He was 73 now, his hair white, his back bent from decades carrying the weight of memories. Beside him stood 3 other old men, Hans, Otto, and Friedrich. Wilhelm had died in 1982, peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by grandchildren who never knew he had once bled in a burning tank. They came to the museum every year on this date, April 15th, the day the war ended for them, the day they had surrendered to American forces and began the long journey of learning how to be human again. A young museum guide approached, maybe 25 years old, enthusiastic and eager. You gentlemen served in panzers? Which unit? Klaus exchanged glances with his crew. His brothers. 4th Company, Jagdpanzer Battalion 559. Hans said quietly. We were called Die Geister. The guide's eyes widened. The ghosts? I have read about you. You survived 17 engagements. The highest survival rate of any Jagdpanther crew in the war. How did you do it? Klaus looked at the massive tank destroyer, at the 88mm gun that could kill at 2 kilometers, at the armor that was both shield and coffin. We understood something most crews did not, he said finally. The Jagdpanther was not designed to help us survive. It was designed to kill the enemy before it killed us. The 85% death rate was not a flaw. It was the cost of stopping an army. But you survived, the guide pressed. Otto smiled, sad and distant. We survived because we were terrified every single day. Fear kept us sharp. Courage got men killed. Friedrich added, and we had each other. In that steel box we were not Germans or soldiers or anything else. We were 5 men who refused to let each other die. Klaus pulled out a photograph, worn and faded. His crew in 1944, standing beside their Jagdpanther, young and scared and trying to look brave. We were children playing at war in machines built for slaughter, he said. The real miracle is not that we survived. It is that we learned to live afterward. The guide nodded respectfully and moved on to other visitors. The 4 old men stood in silence, remembering brothers who did not make it, remembering the sound of engines and gunfire, remembering when they were ghosts. If you watched this story to the end, thank you. These men, these moments, they matter. Hit that like button. Leave a comment telling us what story you want to hear next. And subscribe so you never miss the histories that shaped our world. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Some ghosts deserve to finally rest. Klaus touched the tank one last time, then walked away. Behind him, the Jagdpanther stood silent, a monument to the men who rode inside steel coffins and somehow found their way home.